Let me tell you about the most uncomfortable moment I've ever witnessed in a corporate office. A manager named David walked up to one of his engineers on a Monday morning, put his hand on the guy's shoulder, looked him dead in the eyes, and said with this practiced tone of concern, "Hey Brandon, how was your weekend? And I mean, how was it really?" Brandon just stared at him because 3 days earlier, David had torn into the same engineer in front of the entire team for missing a deadline. Didn't ask questions, didn't listen to context, just unloaded. And now, after attending a weekend emotional intelligence workshop, David was back, freshly certified and asking about feelings. Brandon said, "It was fine," and walked away. I wanted to applaud him. Here's what's happening in companies right now, and nobody wants to talk about it. Emotional intelligence training has become the corporate equivalent of teaching someone to smile at customers. It's performative, it's scripted, and it's making workplaces more uncomfortable, not less. We've taken something that should be about authentic human connection and turned it into a checklist, a set of behaviors to mimic, a corporate mask that's somehow supposed to feel more genuine than the old corporate mask. It doesn't work, and deep down, everyone knows it. Let me be clear about what the original insight around emotional intelligence actually means. The concept comes from psychologists Peter Salovey and John Mayer, later popularized by Daniel Goleman, and at its core, emotional intelligence is about self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. It's the ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and to use that awareness to guide your thinking and behavior. And here's the critical part that gets lost. Truly emotionally intelligent people have something called epistemic humility. They understand the limits of their own knowledge. They recognize that emotional intelligence isn't a destination you reach after a 2-day workshop. It's a practice, a journey, an expedition, if you will. Something you're constantly working on because human beings are complex and you're never going to have all the answers. When a genuinely emotionally intelligent leader is asked about their EQ, they typically deflect or downplay it, not because they're being falsely modest, but because they're acutely aware of how much they don't know. They remember the conversation they botched last week, the employees whose signals they missed, the moment their own stress made them less patient than they should have been. The paradox is this: the act of proclaiming your emotional intelligence contradicts the very quality it claims. It's like announcing, "I'm incredibly humble." The statement itself undermines itself. But there's a deeper issue here that goes beyond humble bragging about EQ credentials. I'm going to say something that might be controversial, but I think it needs to be said. I may be at the point where I want emotional intelligence training to stop, not because the concept is wrong, but because of what we've done to it. We've turned authentic human connection into a performance art, and I'm tired of the performance. I don't want someone asking me about my weekend if they don't actually care. I don't want a manager looking me in the eye with that practiced expression of concern if what they're really doing is following step 3 from their EQ training manual. I don't want the carefully timed pause after I speak that's designed to demonstrate active listening, but really just makes the whole interaction feel like bad theater. If you're naturally standoffish, be standoffish. At least then I know what I'm dealing with. At least the interaction is real. At least I can trust that when you do show concern or interest, it actually means something. But this pretense, this affectation, it makes everything harder. It makes real connection harder because now we're both performing. You're performing empathy and I'm performing like I believe you. We're having a fake conversation on top of a work relationship and neither of us can access what's actually true anymore. Here's what's happened. Companies have taken the idea of bringing your whole self to work and twisted it into something unrecognizable. They say they want authenticity, but what they've actually done is create a new, more elaborate mask. The old corporate persona was cold and professional. The new corporate persona is warm and empathetic, but it's still a persona and it's still fake. And somehow, it's actually worse. Because at least with the old way, everyone knew the game. You put on your professional face, you did your job, you went home. That was honesty in that separation. But now we're supposed to pretend that our manager genuinely cares about our emotional well-being while they're simultaneously measuring our productivity down to the minute. We're supposed to have vulnerable conversations about work-life balance in a culture that still rewards whoever stays the latest and responds to emails fastest or responds to text messages on their day off. It's office politics that's been institutionalized and rebranded as corporate training. We've just changed the rules of the performance. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. I consulted with a marketing firm where they brought in expensive EQ training programs for all their managers. The trainers taught them specific phrases to use. I hear you. That must be difficult. Help me understand your perspective. They learned to maintain eye contact for the optimal amount of time. They practiced their empathy face in role-playing exercises. I'm not making this up. 3 months later, the company did an engagement survey. Employee satisfaction with management had actually dropped. In the open-ended comments, people kept saying variations of the same thing. My manager feels fake now. I don't trust these conversations anymore. I preferred when she was just direct with me. One person wrote, I'd rather have a manager who's genuinely kind of awkward and doesn't always know what to say than one who's clearly reading from a script about how much they care about my feelings. Here's what nobody understood. The training had taught behaviors, not awareness. It taught performance, not presence, and people can feel the difference. We're incredibly good at detecting inauthenticity. It triggers something primal in us. When someone is performing concern, our nervous system picks up on the micro signals that don't align. The slight delay in response, the generic phrases that don't quite fit the situation, the way their eyes look like they're thinking about what to say next instead of actually listening. It's uncanny valley, but for the human emotion. Now, here's where it gets really problematic. When managers are trained to perform emotional intelligence, they start believing their own performance. They think because they asked you about your weekend and nodded sympathetically when you mentioned that you were stressed, they've been emotionally intelligent. They've checked the box. This creates a dangerous blind spot. I worked with a director named Angela who had gone through extensive EQ training. She was great at the verbal components. She'd ask thoughtful questions. She'd reflect back what you said. She'd validate your feelings. But she was completely blind to the fact that her team was drowning. She'd have these lovely, empathetic conversations with people about their workload, and then at the end, she'd add 3 more projects to their plate. Mostly just busy work, things that had no real value to the company. She'd acknowledge that someone was burned out, express genuine sounding concern, and then immediately explain why they needed to stay late and that going home at the normal time was not showing commitment to the team. The emotional intelligence was surface level. It was conversational, but it wasn't structural. It wasn't connected to the actual decision-making or priorities or resource allocation. Her team started calling it empathy theater. She'd perform care, but nothing would change. And here's the worst part. Because Angela had been trained in EQ and believed she was good at it, she couldn't understand why people kept leaving her team, why they kept quitting, why they kept asking to go to different parts of the business. In her mind, she was being emotionally intelligent. She was doing all the things that everyone told her to do. She was having conversations. She was even volunteering to lead the mentoring program. She couldn't see that the gap between her performed empathy and her actual leadership decisions was destroying trust faster than her kind words could build it. There's another way this goes horribly wrong, and it's almost the opposite problem. Some managers use emotional intelligence language as a shield, as a way to avoid accountability or difficult conversations. Picture this. A project fails because a manager made a poor strategic call. Instead of owning the decision, they say, I'm really processing a lot of complex emotions around this right now, and I need everyone to hold space for my journey with this. Or they turn it into group therapy. Let's all take a moment to share how this outcome makes us feel, when what the team actually needs is a clear plan for how to fix the problem and move forward. I've watched managers shut down legitimate criticism by saying, I'm feeling attacked right now, and that's not creating psychological safety for me. They weaponize EQ concepts to make themselves untouchable. Real emotional intelligence would mean you can recognize your own defensive reactions and still engage productively with difficult feedback. It means understanding that sometimes people need decisive action and clear direction more than they need their feelings validated. Sometimes the most emotionally intelligent thing a leader can do or say is, I screwed up. Here's how I'm going to fix it. Here's what I'm going to do differently. No processing, No sharing circle, just accountability in action. So what does appropriate application actually look like? Let me tell you about a CEO that I worked with named Robert. I didn't even know he was considered emotionally intelligent until someone else mentioned it. In 6 months of working together, he never once brought up emotional intelligence or talked about his leadership philosophy. But here's what he did. When someone on his executive team was dealing with a family crisis, he didn't make a big show of asking how they were feeling. He just quietly reorganized responsibilities so that they could take the time off without their projects falling apart. When they came back, he didn't force a big emotional check-in conversation. He just said, "Welcome back, let me know what you need." And when there was a conflict between two department heads, he didn't facilitate a session where everyone got to share their feelings. He asked each person privately what outcome they wanted, identified where their goals actually aligned, and then brought them together with a clear framework for moving forward. When he made a decision that affected people's roles, he didn't perform empathy about how hard it must be. He explained his reasoning clearly, took ownership of the impact, and created space for people to ask questions or express concerns without making it into an emotional spectacle. Here's what made Robert different. His emotional intelligence was integrated into his actual decision-making and leadership, not layered on top as a communication style. He didn't talk about being empathetic. His choices reflected an understanding of how decisions would affect people. And critically, he was consistent. You knew what you were getting. There was no performance, no switch between empathetic leader mode and regular mode. He was just himself, and that self happened to include a genuine consideration for others that just shaped how he led. This is the key distinction nobody teaches in EQ training. Emotional intelligence isn't something you do to people. It's not a set of conversational techniques you deploy. It's an awareness that informs your decisions, your priorities, how you structure work, how you allocate resources, and yes, how you communicate. But the communication is the smallest part. Think about it this way. If you had to choose between two managers, Manager A asks about your weekend every Monday, uses active listening techniques, validates your feelings when you're stressed, and has clearly been trained in emotional intelligence. But when you tell them you're overwhelmed, they sympathize and then assign you another urgent project anyway. Manager B is a bit awkward, doesn't always know the right things to say, and never mentions emotional intelligence. But when you tell them you're overwhelmed, they immediately look at your workload, reprioritize things, and take projects off your plate. Which one is actually more emotionally intelligent? The one whose actions reflect an understanding of your reality, not the one who has better conversational techniques. Here's where the exceptions and limitations come in, because this isn't a simple issue. There are situations where learning about emotional intelligence can be genuinely valuable, particularly for leaders who are very task-focused or analytical and haven't naturally developed strong interpersonal awareness. For them, learning frameworks around emotions, understanding different personality types, or practicing how to have difficult conversations can really open up new capabilities. The problem isn't the learning, it's the performance that comes after. And here's the nuance. Some amount of professional persona is necessary and appropriate. You shouldn't bring your entire unfiltered self to work. If you're having a terrible day, you don't need to dump that on your team. If you find someone annoying, you don't need to express that openly. The issue is when the persona becomes dishonest, when you're pretending to care instead of either actually caring or being professionally neutral. There's a huge difference between I'm going to be polite and professional even though I'm in a bad mood, and I'm going to perform deep concern about your weekend when I genuinely don't care and you know I don't care. One is basic professionalism. The other is insulting to everyone involved. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If you're a leader who's gone through EQ training, ask yourself, am I actually developing greater awareness and letting that shape my decisions? Or am I performing a set of behaviors I learned in the workshop? The test is simple. Are people responding to you with more trust and openness? Or are they being polite but distant? Because people know the difference. They always know the difference. And if you're on the receiving end of someone's newly discovered emotional intelligence, you have permission to be honest about it. If your manager asks about your weekend and you can tell they're just checking a box, you don't have to play along. A simple, "It was fine, thanks," is completely acceptable. You don't owe anyone a performance of openness to match their performance of caring. Real connection happens when both people are being authentic. And sometimes authenticity means being a little awkward, a little unsure, a little imperfect. That's better than the alternative, because at the end of the day, what makes a great leader isn't their ability to ask the right questions or make the right facial expressions. It's whether their actual decisions reflect a genuine understanding and consideration for the people they lead. Everything else is just theater.